Hello, good evening. I'm Jay Steinmetz, Assistant Professor at Fort Hays State University, and this is the Kansas Legislature, our weekly Friday evening call-in show dealing with politics and proceedings of the Kansas Legislature here on Smoky Hills Public Television. I'm a policy fellow from the Docking Institute. We have here on the show two representatives from the Kansas House of Representatives, Representative Barbara Wasinger of the 111th District and Representative Troy Waymaster of the 109th District. Welcome, representatives, for another session here of the Kansas Legislature. It's been a while since I've seen both of you, and a lot has happened. We had a very consequential presidential election in November.
Sure.
We've had problems of issues of accusations of election fraud. We had a storming of the U.S. Capitol, and we had a very busy, politically tumultuous January. And our first question is about elections integrity. How important is it that our state elected officials publicly support the integrity and the results of this last election? And let's start with you, Representative Wasinger.
Well, I think the most important thing is to be sure of how your state is doing. I cannot speak for any other state, but I can speak for the state of Kansas. And I know that we did not have the problems that perhaps other states had. So I'm proud of the state of Kansas. I'm proud of what we've done, and I hope that everyone else can get their act together if they've got a problem where people are accusing them of problems.
Well, we have in this country, we had over 60 court cases, not a shred of evidence of any widespread fraud or illegalities in any of the states being mentioned. Clearly those states, Arizona, Pennsylvania, were states that suspicion of fraud looked obviously politically motivated. Representative Rogers was on the show last week and mentioned, well, you know what state they were not talking about? They're not talking about Kansas. There's a reason why they're not talking about Kansas. How important is it for you folks as elected officials, state elected officials, to speak about the broader national election integrity, the results of November 2020? Representative Waymaster?
Well, and I would just kind of echo the comments that Representative Wasinger made in regards to the integrity of the voting in Kansas. We didn't have any issues. We had a 70% voter participation rate in the state of Kansas, which is one of the highest ever in the state's history. And that was duly available, and that happened because of the accessibility that we opened up in regards to the voting in both the primary and the general. You could do the standard going to the polls. You could also do the absentee, and then we had the mail-in ballots as well. Mm-hmm. But they were always verified, and in fact, the Secretary of State, Scott Schwab, had a press release going out saying that the elections in the state of Kansas were fine. I mean, there was no real fraud going on within the state of Kansas. And Barb's correct. I mean, we can't really talk about how other states are going to be doing that. We put election practices into place like the ID verification when you go and vote, which actually to me makes sense. You have to show your ID to board a plane. I think you should do that when you're using your constitutional right to cast a vote for an individual that you think should be representing you. We did that years ago. There was some consternation about that when it first happened, but I think that helped with Kansas not having any election fraud. And then also we've done many election bills throughout the years to just validate the integrity of our election system in the state of Kansas.
Well, on the state of Kansas, let's stick with that for just one quick question. The Kansas Speak survey, which came out in November 2020, only 26.4% of Kansans were very concerned about mail-in voting in the election. You mentioned we've had an unusually large amount of mail-in voting because of the pandemic. Any concerns that you have about mail-in voting? There were certainly certain elements of conservative media, for example, Republican Party, casting doubt into the process of mail-in voting nationwide and in this state. Were those doubts simply wrong? Representative Wasinger? Or, yeah.
Whichever. Here, go ahead.
Barb, go ahead.
Well, my biggest concern with mail-in voting is I have trouble getting my mail delivered to the right place now. I don't know if you've ever had a lot of mail lost. I know I used to send things to my mother when she lived in the Chicago area, and she would never get it, or they would not have things. So I mean, the biggest concern is just making sure that the mail gets where it's supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's, of course we can make comments about the rest of the United States, but I think as state representatives, we need to be deeply concerned with our state and take care of our state and make sure it's right. And I think that's true for every state. So
we should make comments about other states and nationwide, and that's why I want to set aside the election results in Kansas for a moment and get you folks to speak as elected officials about the nationwide results. We have here, here's the argument. We have here a public that was lied about those results. There were lies about the election results. There is not a shred of evidence of any widespread illegality or fraud. You folks were elected on the same ballot that had the choice of President Trump, former President Trump, or current President Joe Biden. The concern here is we had an assault on the U.S. Capitol. Violence, people dying, okay? Setting aside anything about the impeachment hearing and the Senate trial, that assault on the Capitol, the concern is that these scare tactics are not going away. And we may have in the future potential for more political violence, a potential for a complete erosion and collapse in the level of trust that the public has over the nationwide election system. So setting aside the issue of the integrity of the election in Kansas for a moment, to speak to the national results. Representative Waymaster, any words?
Well, the only thing I would say in regards to the controversy of mail-in voting, obviously that did play some havoc in the state of Pennsylvania when the Secretary of State changed the date and said if your ballot is received, it will be counted. Was that under the purview and the authority of the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania? That was questioned. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us question that as well. Mm-hmm. In the state of Kansas, we do have a deadline. Mm-hmm. I think it's 5 days after the election. Your mail-in ballot has to be received. So why weren't those same measures put into this, into those states that we knew were going to be very controversial states like Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona? They should have had precautions put into place. And I think they were probably looking back, and hindsight is 20/20, and saying, okay, we have to address the issue because mail-in voting is probably going to be staying. Even though some may not like it and some may disapprove of it.
Do you think
due to the pandemic,
yeah.
It was, I don't want to say it was necessary,
yeah.
But we couldn't restrict an individual's right to vote. And mail-in voting was about the only way that we could ensure that every Kansan, every American was going to have the ability to cast their vote for the candidate that they wanted. Now that we've done it, it's hard to close that door. So we're going to have to put precautions into place that is going to validate and verify mail-in voting.
So here seems to be the question. How do we have a legitimate conversation about some of the processes and procedures that ensure election integrity, have honest and open conversations about it, but also ensure the public that the United States of America has transparent, safe, reliable elections processes across the states? Representative Wasinger?
I wish I had the answer because if I had the answer, I would probably be running elections for the entire United States. I think we've discussed that. Safeguards to make sure that people can get their vote in, make sure people can get there to take care of their votes. But there's been a heightened issue within the press and other organizations that have also stirred up a lot of people. And I think we all need to take a deep breath, take a look at how we're doing things, and everybody needs to calm down.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Just to remind you all, this is a call-in show. We look forward to your calls. You can call and ask questions about anything with regards to the Kansas Legislature or politics happening now. Our phone number for the Kansas Legislature is 1-800-337-4788. That's a call-in show number, 1-800-337-4788. Senator Roger Marshall, House Representative Tracy Mann, decision to refuse to certify the electoral votes from Arizona and Pennsylvania without a shred of evidence. Was this a dereliction of duty? Comments? Representative Waymaster.
I really can't speak or make comments on to the rationale that they used to cast the votes that they did in regards to certifying the presidential election votes. I'm not going to speak for them on exactly where they came as far as their decision making.
Representative Wasinger, no evidence, refused to certify?
Well, I think they felt like they had some. So I think they made the decisions they felt were best, and I'm not going to second guess their decisions either. So everything is finished and taken care of.
Claims of evidence require disclosure. Didn't have any disclosure. Well, let's move on and talk about something else.
Why don't we do that?
I want to reiterate, though, this is an important topic, very important topic for the American people. A topic that
Well, and one thing that I kind of wanted to go back and then, let's move on to a different topic. We have always had questionable results in elections throughout the United States history. I think the point that you made where we had the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol, which all of us, I think, is abhorrent. I don't think
unprecedented.
I don't think it's unprecedented. And it was something, I mean, I was watching it on TV thinking, is this really happening? We do have to circumvent and make sure that that is not going to happen in the future. But I mean, I can recall, the election of 1960 was questionable in regards to the state of Illinois.
And Texas.
And we've had
and then
in
Florida
Texas,
with the hanging chads.
in 2000. I mean, we've had controversial elections.
Every time.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that the pinnacle of it
Yeah.
was the storming of the U.S. Capitol,
Yeah.
which, like I said, I think everybody can agree
Agreed.
that was something that shouldn't have happened and something that we should not accept in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate those words. Okay, so let's move on, talk a little Kansas politics. Unemployment, Department of Labor, a lot of issues happening here. People are upset. You've mentioned that you're getting quite a bit of mail and quite a bit of correspondence from constituents on this. We've got this 1099 form that's being sent to Kansans, of which they're going to have to pay taxes on, and this is an element of fraud. They never applied for unemployment. We've also got some displeasure from some of your constituents who are trying to apply for unemployment and not getting very far. How do we smooth out this process? How do we respond to the fraud, first of all? And then how do we smooth out this process or put some pressure on the Department of Labor to make that happen? Let's start with Representative Wasinger.
I think there's been a lot of pressure on the Department of Labor, and I know that the legislature continued from the start of basically from
March.
Yeah, back in March, saying this is going to be a problem. We've got to watch it. We've got to watch it, and it wasn't, as Representative Waymaster said, there have been 4 different Department of Labor heads. I mean, it wasn't until the end of January, beginning of February, that they finally put in some encryption and caught a million chances of people trying to hack in to the state of Kansas.
In 1 week.
In 1 week.
And 1 week.
And the issue is that one of the problems as we had when I was a county commissioner is hackers and thieves were continually trying to get into county treasurer websites and get into their databases. We've known this for a long time, and we have to be watching for it. We have to spend more money. They needed to do this way back in March, and they haven't. And now, every day, I probably take care of 20 different phone calls, texts, and emails. Please help me. I need your help. And Representative Waymaster said he had the same. It's estimated over $500 million has been taken from our unemployment fund because of these fraudulent hackers. There's $1 billion in the fund. There was $1 billion, and now there's $400 million left. Maybe if we're lucky, that should have been taken care of. The Department of Labor was warned. We were asking for it. They were not knowing how to do it, but that's why we hire people to do that. And they finally did something at the end of January.
Because we did something.
Because we did.
And Representative Wasinger is exactly correct. I mean, from the start of the pandemic, we were telling the Department of Labor, you are going to have to watch this. Because I believe the fund was about $1.2 billion when we entered the pandemic. And serving on the Strengthening People and Revitalizing Kansas task force, that is something that we talked at length, is in regards to the unemployment fund. Could we use some of the federal dollars that came into the state of Kansas and replenish that fund? and have that money be directed towards the unemployment claims that are valid. Of course, then everything that was referred from the Spark Task Force then went to the State Finance Council, which I'm also a member on. That was another topic where we talked about it at length. Was,
and the governor's on that too.
And the governor, yeah, she calls those meetings. And then Senator Denning, I mean, he was always wanting to put money into the unemployment fund that we had left over from the CARES Act money, and it would be vetoed by the governor. So finally, in December, we were able to get something in, but then the federal government changed the deadline, which negated the amendment that was made in the State Finance Council, so we could put some of that money into the unemployment fund and trying to have it solvent. I believe it was the third, or maybe it was the second, interim unemployment, or the Department of Labor secretary said, well, we don't need to worry about that when we're in the Spark Committee, because we can get a 0% interest loan from the federal government. Well, we're going to have to pay that back. I mean, just because the government is giving you a 0% interest loan, yes, it's not going to cost us anything, but we're going to have to pay that loan back. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the mentality, is we don't need to worry about it because the federal government will step in. And like, I said, we entered this pandemic with $1.2 billion in that trust fund. And now, because of the fraudulent claims that have been paid out most likely to foreign countries, there is no way for us to recoup that money back. And so Representative Wasinger is correct. We were watching this all these months. Mm-hmm. Nothing was being done. And then finally we introduced House Bill 2195, which we had a hearing in my committee, and then also House Bill 2196, which was in the Commerce and Economic Development Committee. And that shone the light on the exposure that we had in the unemployment trust fund. Mm-hmm. And that's when we saw action by the governor's office and the administration. And I can speak on House Bill 2195. What that bill did is it kept all of our private entities, our businesses, our school districts harmless from having to have an increase in their taxes to the unemployment fund. And that was anywhere from $300 to $400 million, maybe even up to $700 million that our mm-hmm. businesses, school districts, and other private entities were going to be responsible for replenishing that fund because of the fraudulent claim.
And all right, but the worst part were the emails from the people who
are valid.
They're valid, and they can't pay their rent. They can't get they can't keep their jobs because their jobs don't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. So every step is heartbreaking, and all the people that contact us they can't get through on the phone. They can't get through on the website. They can't get through on email. And the minute they put on the Department of Labor website a special email to send your fraudulent claims, it crashed. No one could get on it. There was an error message. No such address exists. That's a problem. That's a huge problem for Kansas.
Let me go to a caller here. We've got a couple of callers online. Wallace from Osborne on line 2. Good evening, Wallace. What is your question?
Hello.
Hi.
Yes.
This is Wallace, and I was calling in to talk. Are you ready for my question?
Yep. Go ahead, Wallace. Good evening.
Okay. I've just got a suggestion. We got all these different type of elections and stuff in different states. If we made one deal, so it was over the whole United States, where all votes and be into the office 2 days prior to election. They don't have to be counted, but have them be there. Eliminate a lot of this chance for scandal. It sounds to be real simple to me. It probably wouldn't work because every state wants to do their own thing, but that's just trying to leave them out to do their scuttlebutt or whatever they want to do. Thank you, sir.
Good suggestion. Thank
you, Wallace.
What are your thoughts, Representative Waymaster, on this is a centralizing our elections process?
And I have to say thank you for Wallace, because he's one of my constituents since I represent Osborne County. To have a uniform platform for elections is not a bad idea throughout the entire United States. I don't know how that falls under the 10th Amendment with states' rights and wanting to look at how they want to handle each election in their particular state.
Well,
I'm assuming
it's specific to the Constitution as well. Article 1 states, and the Electoral College, and Article 2,
right.
It's determined by the states, the elections process.
And so that's going to be something that would be very hard to circumvent and try to implement nationwide. Because, I mean, as we've seen with many pieces of legislation that has passed Congress and been signed by whoever's president, states challenge it. And Kansas has been involved in many of those lawsuits as well. And in most cases, it comes back and it says it does come down to states' rights. Mm-hmm. And they can determine exactly how they're going to handle whatever they are going to handle in their particular state. Like I said, it makes sense. But as Wallace said, it might be too easy to implement, and it may not be able to happen.
Yeah, it requires a constitutional amendment to do. And before we get to you, Representative Wasinger, a lot has been said about what makes the American electoral system so transparent and fair and hard to instigate widespread fraud is because it is decentralized. Votes are counted at the county level.
Yeah.
Votes are certified states. You have audits for every state. You have recounts that are possible. You have a process that's transparent in every state.
Canvassing of the votes.
And decentralization can be a virtue. What says you,
very
Representative
much
Wasinger?
so. Mm-hmm. It's the reason the United States was formed the way it was to maintain that you didn't have Britain rule. You had individual states that came in a united fashion to take care of business. And so it isn't, it's a good idea in theory, but it is not what we've chosen to do as the United States.
Let's move on here and get another caller in. Mary from Garden City. Good evening. Mary, what is your question?
Hi there. Yes, my question.
Hi.
My question was in regards to the drug reform laws in Kansas and how we can go about changing the laws in legislation here in Kansas.
And Mary, in particular, what specifically law changes that you had in mind?
Basically, I was wanting to check on, with the drug reform laws, like, it's just crazy how someone can get a 6-year sentence on a probation violation when there are, I'm sorry, when there's people that have done way worse crimes and, they just have like a few months. Mm-hmm. Or I just wonder how we could get the drug reform laws into Kansas legislation and how we can just take a look at that with, when a probation violation and nonviolent and first time and you can get 6 years in prison and there's people in there that have done way worse and have less time. It just doesn't make sense.
Mary, I have good news for you. There is something called drug court that they have started implementing in different counties, and they have in Ellis County, where the chief judge in Ellis County, Judge Brown, came to the county commission when I was a county commissioner, and they had to match some funds in order to start drug court. What he realized and what we all understand is there's a revolving door with drug cases. They see the same people. They have to want to make a change, and we have to want to make a change. So drug court takes, they now I think have had 20 to 30 graduates that have gotten clean. They didn't go to jail. They weren't put back into jail because of violations. They were put in this program, and then they were held accountable to each other. Mm-hmm. And so there are things that we're trying to do on a smaller level to stop that, but not being on judiciary and not hearing all of that, I know that they're always trying to find answers for that. So I appreciate your thoughts, and we have to agree. Yes.
Yeah, diversion programs, drug diversion programs. It's an important question, especially with regards to nonviolent drug offenses and criminal reform. Is there reform that can be done at the state level that can?
And we have passed some bills in the past where it limited the sentencing on certain drug crimes. When you look at the overall picture, and I think, and Barbara's right, we have a revolving door issue, and that falls into what many would say is a mental health crisis that we need to address across the state. And namely, this would be in regards to substance abuse. And we did a mental health tour across the state of Kansas 2 years ago. Started in the El Dorado Correctional Facility, went to Wichita, Hutchinson, Larned, Hayes, Manhattan, and then ended it in Topeka. And you saw in those facilities all mental health issues. So it's not just, drug offenses or substance abuse, but in a lot of those cases, it was how does that impact the entire family, the whole family unit. As like when we visited KVC in Hayes, that was for children. I mean, and the home life that they have. And then the facility that went to in Hutchinson, same thing. It was trying to have some type of normalcy for children so they don't fall into the perpetual steps that their parents did and run the same course. So we have to look at, yes, drug reform, but then we also have to look at how can we limit drug offenses.
Right. And it's true. We have to take care of our children. The problems of the adults carry on to the children, and it gets repeated. So mental health is very important, and right now our jails are basically mental health hospitals.
I was going to make that comment. Thank you.
Yes. So
let's go on to another caller here. We got a lot of callers tonight,
good.
which is great. Nick from Victoria. Good evening, Nick. Are you there?
Yeah, that's yours.
yes.
Yes.
Hi, Nick. What is your
Hey, Nick.
question?
Well, my question is, one of which is, I've tried to contact Barb Wasinger about some issues with the Department of Labor and left a couple of messages and never heard back. So I don't know the best way to get in touch with her.
Nick,
And my second question is, what would be the status of the state budget relative to tax collection?
well, that's a
Answer
good
first
question. Nick, I'm sorry. I have answered every phone call that I've gotten. I have had a problem with my office assistant that hasn't shown up in the last few days. And so trying to get some help with that. But I believe I answered someone by the name of Nick from Victoria. I remember the phone call, and I think I called you back as well as emailed you. So if you email me again or call, email is barb.wasinger@house.ks.gov, because this is what I do all day long between meetings, and I'm more than happy to send your information to the Department of Labor at an email address that we've been given as legislators. So I apologize. I don't have your last name. So if you can talk to someone or do that or email me, my office number is 785-296-4683. So try that, and I will make sure to check on Monday, and I'll call my office voicemail and try to get it this weekend. So please let me know, and I am more than happy to help you. Everyone is so frustrated. So
And the second question from Nick sounds like kind of a budget question.
Yes.
Revenue,
Yeah.
Spending, state of the budget right now. Where are we, Representative Waymaster?
How long do I have?
he can finish.
I was like, I
He
can
finish.
go quite a while on this. Well, let's back up, and let's go back to the last week in March and the month of April when we had a shutdown across the state. Businesses were closed if they were deemed non-essential. Schools were closed for 2 weeks, at least. Some didn't go back at all, or if they did, maybe it was only for a few days. So when the Consensus Revenue Estimate Group met on April 20th, they didn't know how to project the tax collections for the state of Kansas because of the situation that we were in at that time. They didn't know how long this was going to last. They didn't know, when a vaccine would come out. They didn't know what the revenues would look like. So I have said I think they were overly pessimistic in their numbers in April. I mean, when their numbers came out on the 20th of April, we were looking at about a $200 million shortfall in fiscal year 2021, and almost $1 billion deficit in fiscal year 2022. As the months went on, there was only 1 month that we did not exceed the revenue estimate for that particular month, and I believe that was in May. So we have been exceeding the expectations that were set by the consensus revenue estimate group in April because, like I said, they made it so low. I mean, the bar was so low. And so then when they came back in November, they were, as I would say, cautiously optimistic about where the revenues were going to be. And they changed the figures for the state budget. Ended up with the new numbers in November. The state budget had a surplus of about $300 million. And in fiscal year 2022, we had a deficit of $175 million. So in my position, that was a breath of fresh air. I mean, even though we had a deficit in fiscal year 2022, it wasn't the nearly $1 billion that they had forecasted in April. Since the consensus revenue estimate group has met in November, we have exceeded every single month since. And actually in the month of January, we exceeded it by $90 million.
So good news.
It's good news.
Optimistic.
It's good news. And that's why I say I think they were cautiously optimistic in November, realizing the pessimism that they put in the numbers in April. And so actually, after we got the new numbers in January, I wanted to see where everything was at as far as the budget. And I told the research staff, I said, generate me a profile with the governor's recommendations in her budget, although we all know that they're not going to happen. And in appropriations, we're going to back those out. And I can say we have a healthy ending balance. Either way, which we're not going to do the recommendations that the governor has made because some of those are pretty controversial. And the last couple of years, we didn't do it under her administration. We didn't do it under the Brownback administration. They're just not going to pass the legislature. And in fact, I was interviewed when we had the joint meeting with Senate Ways and Means about what I thought about some of the proposals by the governor. And I said, I don't know why we're bringing these up again. Yeah. Because they don't pass the legislature. And so we're going to have to back those items out. And even by doing that, we still have a positive ending balance. And I feel the economy is getting stronger. Yes, we have a 6% unemployment rate, but it's a lot better than what it was in March and April when it was 11 and 12. The economy is getting stronger. Now, some can argue, is that due to the stimulus money that was received in late December or in the month of January? Is that more confidence because Congress is talking about a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill? Where we're going to, each individual is going to get $1,400 if they make $75,000 or less. So is there more confidence out there because things are looking better in regards to the budget profile?
My biggest concern about the budget, though, is a lot of this is sales tax from online purchases and things like that.
Which is something we're going to back out.
Oh, yeah, but we have to be mindful of all the companies that are struggling, that can't get supply chain needs, that are close to closing. Many businesses closed. Think of small town Kansas. They are still struggling because of this shutdown. And so just thinking that it's all going to come out is a pipe dream.
Okay, let's go to another caller here. Tim from Colby. Good evening, Tim. What is your question?
My question is on the election as to why a person can check his votes when he has electronically voted.
Check in votes when it's electronically voted?
Are you talking about double checking electronic votes or a paper trail for electronic votes?
I went to the courthouse and voted by machine, and it will not let me check my vote to make sure that it is recorded correctly.
Oh, just to verify the ballot is correct, what you submitted. I think, on the state of Kansas uses Dominion as our voting machines. And personally, I vote here in Bunker Hill, and we don't have voting machines. I still circle the ovals. And I've never participated using a voting machine. So I can't say I'm sure there's some way to verify that the ballot you have cast is the accurate ballot that you want.
Well, I know the voting machines in Ellis County, once you vote, it asks you, are these all
Correct.
what you voted for? And you push correct, but it also provides a paper ballot for double checking what the electronic ballot is. So hopefully you have that. I didn't hear where you were from.
Colby.
Colby. Well, I hope Colby has that as well. So
We've got another caller here, Agnes from Hayes. Agnes, good evening. What is your question?
Yes. I want to return to the Kansas Department of Labor. I would like to know if there is anything specific that they are doing regarding all of the fraud. It is just so widespread, and I'm not sure that people understand that they will be getting a 1099 if somebody collects off of their account, and how they will need to handle that, and if the Kansas Department of Labor is addressing this fraud. It is just so widespread. I would be interested in knowing what specifically might be going on with that.
Great question from Agnes. I mean, this sounds like a cybersecurity issue, but it's also damage control right now. How do we put out the fire in the house with regards to those who have experienced the fraud?
Well, and like we discussed before, until we had the two bills that we introduced and then had hearings, that was the first time that actually they acted on the fraudulent claims with the Kansas Department of Labor, and they made the choice over that weekend to shut down the unemployment system and try to put safeguards in place to block the fraudulent claims. And then that went live again on Tuesday. And then, as Representative Wasinger mentioned, in that week after, they stopped a potential of 1 million fraudulent claims. But that took the legislature prompting them to act. What they're going to be doing forward, obviously, in the governor's budget, there is a request for a system upgrade for the Kansas Department of Labor. We haven't had the Kansas Department of Labor's budget come through the House Appropriations Committee yet, so I don't know what that budget committee is recommending to the House Appropriations Committee. But I'm assuming with everything that's been going on and the issues that we need to address with the Kansas Department of Labor, I'm going to guess that they'll probably approve that amount to go in for a system upgrade.
And Agnes, the Secretary of Revenue spoke to the tax committee on which I'm a member of, and I asked him what the Department of Revenue was going to do. His first response was that once they get the 1099s, they legislatively and statutorily can't do anything. They have to have a corrected 1099. And I said, what are you going to do to help the Department of Labor? Because it does affect the Department of Revenue. It's going to cost the Department of Revenue all kinds of money to redo things. I don't think he was ready for that question. I did get an email from one of his executive assistants, and they said that they are working on a plan to help the Department of Labor and try to check. One of the things that I keep hearing is how difficult would it be when you get an unemployment claim to have someone call the company that has their phone number on it and say, did Barb Wasinger work for you? Was she employed by you? Is this a correct claim? And none of that was done. I know that's difficult, but when this all started, the governor sent a whole bunch of employees from all different departments to take care of unemployment phone calls and questions. And that's not being done. So I'm hoping that now that they really feel the spotlight, they'll figure out how to get things done. So I agree with you, Agnes. It's a huge problem.
And the governor herself also was a victim of the fraud. So let's go to another caller here. We got Pat from Plainville. Good evening, Pat. What is your question? Hello, good evening, Pat.
Good evening. Yes, do you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you fine.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for taking my call. I was one of those Kansans who had a fraudulent unemployment claim right before Christmas.
Oh my.
And my first call was to my employer. My next call was to the Department of Labor, and I got zero help. But my third call was to the Kansas Attorney General's office, and that office was just full of information and good help. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
That's good to have some good news.
reaching out to the Attorney General might be effective for those who've been.
Now, in regards to the last call from Agnes, I was looking up in the governor's budget that we received, and she does have in her budget investing $37.5 million from federal or special revenue funds for the unemployment insurance modernization effort.
Okay, great. We've got another caller here. We've got Randy from Great Bend. Good evening, Randy. How are you doing? What is your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, with the executive orders coming out of Washington, what the general feeling in the legislature was concerning initiatives other states have taken to stop the overreach of government, the spending issues, firearms issues. What are they considering in our state legislature? And like North Dakota's got a law, trying to pass a law that says we can cancel any of these executive orders. We won't honor them. Are we thinking anything like this, or have we considered the conventions of the state movement to get some new amendments added to the Constitution for term limits and such?
Lots going on there.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's a lot
we've had an active government in Washington, of course. Not much state governments can do with regards to that. But thoughts?
I know. One of my first couple of years, I served on the Federal and State Affairs Committee, and that's where any type of this legislation would go through, including the Convention of States, which Randy mentioned at the latter part of his question. And there were times that we did put a clause into legislation that says as long as it's in the confines of our borders, we regulate what's going on, and Washington, D.C. does not. When it leaves our borders, then you can't really do anything about it. But as long as within the confines of the border of the state of Kansas, we can. In regards to the Convention of States, I know something has been introduced. It is in Federal and State Affairs. I believe they did have a hearing or scheduling a hearing on it.
They scheduled one.
The best person to talk to about that one would be the chairman, John Barker, which he may not appreciate me thinking.
That's right. Well, you can always look it up online.
Yeah, online. But I mean, we have talked about the conventions of states for years, and I think we had 2 votes on the House floor. The issue, and I shouldn't say the issue, the concern with the conventions of states when it goes to the floor for a vote is you have to have 84 voting in favor.
And it's very hard to get that.
And it's very hard to get to that supermajority vote count. And both times it failed. And I think the highest that we had was about 75 in regards for the conventions of state. I voted for it because I do think it's in the power of the states to restrict the federal government. We feel there's an overreach. But like I said, it's always was unable to cross over that obstacle of the 84 count rule.
Are you supportive of term limits for Congress?
That is something actually, I think that is an inherent power in the voter. If you're unhappy with your elected individual, you can vote them out. And that's been, I have a political science degree. So that was something that I learned in a high school government class. That's something I learned when I was pursuing my political science degree. I believe that right is actually to the voter. The other issue, and I know I've had conversations with individuals in regarding term limit. And when you do that, you restrict the expertise and the knowledge base in that particular branch of government. So let's say for the Kansas House of Representatives, if you had a 2-term limit rule, that's 4 years. It takes a lot longer to realize how the process works. And then when you do, is you give that control over to the special interest groups and lobbyists. And they're the ones that are then instructing the new individuals who come in. State of Nebraska did term limits. They regret it because you do not have the institutional knowledge and the expertise of how does legislation get through the process.
Representative Wasinger, you've come out in the past in favor of term limits. Thoughts on that?
I don't have a problem with term limits. I think you need to extend them so that it's not a shorter period of time, such as 2 terms for a House of Representatives. The problem comes when people continue to be in office and they don't have people running against them. And we have a problem with apathy of people not wanting to be in politics, unfortunately. There are a lot of House seats in Kansas that have run uncontested. And if that person doesn't run, there isn't anyone.
Are you pointing me out?
No.
Let's get to
I'm
another
not.
caller.
I'm not.
If we
I'm
can
not.
squeak in 2 more callers here.
Because I was uncontested last night.
We've got Larry from Ulysses. Larry, good evening. What is your question?
Yes.
Good evening,
This is Larry from Ulysses, and my question is, I understand that right now there is no statute to collect sales tax on internet sales, but some companies voluntarily do that. Those legislators that are opposed to doing a collection of sales tax off of the internet, what are their arguments that continues to keep that from being put into statute form?
Great question from Larry. We talked about that last week as well. I mean, a statute that will require and not voluntary help out Kansas small businesses. What are your thoughts, Representative Watson?
We've been working on that, and it's been vetoed by the governor in the last 2 years. It's not an issue of overtaxing people. It's a tax equity question. So what we're trying to do is put in that and we just heard it in tax committee again. The Kansas Chamber of Commerce brought it up, and I believe it's important to do because when you don't have, it's mostly third-party sales through Amazon itself. If you buy something from Amazon, it collects sales tax. If they facilitate a third party in places like Etsy, they don't necessarily have to pay sales tax. And those are the people that are hurting the small businesses in Kansas. And so I think it's fair to pass that. I believe the difference in state general funds would be around $48 million. So my concern with that, where it goes into the state general fund, is I'd like to see it go to a specific area, and that being perhaps starting to break down and lower the food sales tax, because that's been a big issue for a lot of Kansas.
And that's what we've done in the past.
Yeah, I mean we have a sales tax in this state that's pretty regressive for food and clothing and such.
Food is the worst.
And what are your thoughts on that? I mean, can that potentially be a trade-off in the future, lowering food sales tax? And
well, we have done that, and it's had the veto pin. That's been a part of the tax bill that we've had twice now. In regards to Larry's question, in regards to the online sales tax, Barb's is correct that if you have a location in the state of Kansas and you do online sales, you do have to remit the sales tax, and you pay the sales tax. But at the same time, I will say, as far as the tax code, that's a very piecemeal approach. The argument that I think is the most convincing for the online sales tax, if we were going to move in that direction, for any online merchandise, would be, and this argument actually came from a constituent where they had a business, they sell cameras, someone came in, he showed them how to use it, then they went online and bought it, and they didn't pay the sales tax. So not only did he lose the business of that customer, the state also lost the tax revenue that would have been generated had they purchased it in his business. We have to think about our brick and mortar buildings, and with the online presence, they're getting fewer and fewer, and with the pandemic, they've gotten fewer and fewer, and so we have to, just for our state economy, we have to be forward thinking and actually have not this piecemeal approach in regards to online purchases, but we need to upgrade our tax code, because I think we've just been doing bits and pieces here,
Right.
and it's not really holistically solving the problem.
Yeah, Amazon's grown by billions and over the pandemic. Let's squeeze in one more question here. Mary from Wichita. Good evening. Mary, are you there? What's your question?
Yes, I am. My question is, I'm trying to represent the silent minority. There are people that, like, from the time they're born to 18 years of age and over, that get a list called HCBS, which is a waiting list for people that have disabilities. The question is there any way that they can get more help for, like, daycare, lodging, medical, home health services? When they turn 18, 19, then they get on SSI, but there still is no home, no placement for them. And we are Kansas strong, and we love Kansas, but we could surely use a little more help, the silent majority and minority of people that take care and are deeply vetted with these sweet, sweet people.
Mary, you're right. We need to take better care of our disabled, and we need to be very cognizant of their needs. And home care, group care, we've tried to increase it. It's something that we do need to look at. So I appreciate your phone call. You're right. We do need to take care of the weakest of our communities.
Yeah, how do we broaden access to those who are struggling the most and disabilities? How do we improve quality and struggle the access? It's strengthen the access. A huge problem.
This is an issue that we have numerous conversations about in the Appropriations Committee, because really what it comes down to is money. And it's not only money for the services for these individuals that are disabled, because the waiting list is huge. And there's no way that we could just completely eliminate the waiting list, but we need to start, getting some of those off of that waiting list, because the numbers just keep increasing year after year after year. And so there's been many different approaches that we've looked at. We talked about mental health before in the show. That's another area that could assist with this. But I mean, it comes down to money in the state budget. And it's like, last year we put in the budget for the employees that work for the IDD population and the disabled population. They haven't had a pay increase for many, many years. And we had that in the budget last year for them to have a pay increase, and it was vetoed. So we had the money in there to try to help out that aspect of the disabled population for the employees that work with them on a daily basis, check on them at home and make sure they're okay. And then they thought they were getting a pay increase and they didn't. I'm certain that's going to be an issue that's going to be brought up again this year, but we do need to have wrap our arms around that, because the waiting list just keeps getting larger and larger.
It sounds like there's a political element to this. The question becomes, how do we politically bring about some kind of bipartisan consensus so that there's support for these budget measures? Speak to the politics side of this. How do you bring over the other side and get some consensus on this issue? Where is the consensus?
Well, and I'll talk about the budget process and specifically in regards to this. We have the Social Services Budget Committee. They hold the hearings, and then they actually listen to all the testimony from the departments, the agencies that handle the disabled population. Then it comes into appropriations, and then people have other ideas of where that money should go, and so some of the recommendations are not accepted. And then that's just the way the makeup of the committee is.
Well, because everyone has their priorities of where money should go, and that's why you elect different people to their positions. Some people, I have friends that are very big in helping women, domestic violence, sexual violence, She's very concerned about that. Of course, that's where she wants money to go. But the minute you take money from one pot, it takes money away from something else. So you really have to, I think this is bipartisan. Everyone sits down and says, okay, well, if you have $1, you can't spend 75 cents of it on candy.
Prioritize.
And you know, you really have to work at it. And I think it goes across the board that everyone is concerned.
With just a few seconds left, thank you. Wonderful show. We had a lot of good issues covered here, and it's good to see both of you on the Kansas Legislature. This is a wrap for this week. Tune in next week. We'll have another show on the Kansas Legislature, Politics from Kansas. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Good night.